1976ஆம் ஆண்டிலே அது வெளியக சுயநிர்ணய உரிமையாக தனி நாடாக
யாதும் ஓரே யாவரும் கெளியர். We are one people. The state of Tamil Nadu was to be home not only to the people of the northern and eastern province.
நாங்கள் வெளியே விடப்பட்ட போதுதான் அப்படியானால் எங்களை விட்டு விடுங்கள், நாங்கள் தனியாக செல்கிறோம்.
The direct negotiations were embarked upon between the government of Sri Lanka and the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Nadu with Norwegian facilitation in September 2002.
உள்ளக சுயநிர்ணய உரிமை உபயோகிக்க வேண்டும் என்பதிலே அனைத்து தமிழ் கட்சிகளும் இப்பொழுது ஒரே நிலைப்பாட்டுக்கு வந்திருக்கிறோம்.
Anton Balasingham, who represented Prabhakaran in 6 rounds of direct discussions across the world, was the only member of the LTTE delegation with a grasp of the underlying issues. As my relationship with him grew less formal,
கலாநிதி நீலன் திருச்செல்வத்தோடு இணைந்து ஒரு முக்கியமான ஆவணத்தை தயாரித்தவர் என்பது எங்கள் அனைவருக்கும் தெரியும். பேராசிரியர் GLPDs அவர்கள் தான் இலங்கை அரசாங்கத்தினுடைய தூதுக்குழு தலைவராக இருந்தவர்.
they were intractably resolved to make more use of it. Anton Balasingham's response remains indelibly etched in my mind. He told me that he had nothing to reproach himself with. He had done his best to present the reality of the situation to his leader.
But in 1976 or in the mid-70s, after the first Republican Constitution was enacted on the 22nd of May 1972, it was articulated as external self-determination and the call for a separate state. ஆனால் ஆரம்ப காலத்திலே ஒரு சமஷ்டி கட்டமைப்பிலே இந்த உரித்தை நாங்கள் வெளிக்கொணரலாம் என்று சொல்லியிருந்த போதிலேயும் 76ஆம் ஆண்டிலே அது வெளியக சுயநிர்ணய உரிமையாக தனி நாடாக இருக்க வேண்டும் என்று பிரகடனம் செய்யப்பட்டதற்கான காரணம், முதலாவது குடியரசு அரசியல் யாப்பு 1972ஆம் ஆண்டு மே மாதம் 22ஆம் தேதி அங்குரார்ப்பணம் செய்யப்பட்ட போது இந்த நாட்டிலே இருந்து, நாட்டின் தேசிய வாழ்க்கையிலே இருந்து நாங்கள் வெளியே விடப்பட்ட போதுதான் அப்படியானால் எங்களை விட்டு விடுங்கள், நாங்கள் தனியாக செல்கிறோம் என்று சொன்னோம். When we were left out of the national life of this country in the first autonomous constitution that was enacted, that was when we said, all right, then you leave us out, let us go our own way. And we all know the history thereafter. It was bloody, violent for close to 3 decades. And now, all Tamil political parties are unison in our call that we must have internal self-determination. நாங்கள் உள்ளக சுயநிர்ணய உரிமை உபயோகிக்க வேண்டும் என்பதிலே அனைத்து தமிழ் கட்சிகளும் இப்பொழுது ஒரே நிலைப்பாட்டுக்கு வந்திருக்கிறோம். Therefore, it is appropriate that the Thandai Selva Memorial Trust has invited a person like Professor GLPDs, who is our orator this morning, to speak, and he will speak on the subject Federalism and the paths to constitutional reform. சமஷ்டியும் அரசியலமைப்பு சீர்திருத்தத்துக்கான வழிமுறைகளும் என்ற தலைப்பிலே பேசுவதற்கு பேராசிரியர் GLPDs போன்ற ஒருவரை தந்தை செல்வா அறக்கட்டளை அழைத்திருப்பது முக்கியமான ஒரு தருணம். Professor Piris, as we all know, together with Dr. Neelan Tiruchelvam, formulated a very important document during President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga's time. ஜனாதிபதி சந்திரிகா குமாரதுங்க பண்டாரநாயக அவர்களுடைய காலத்திலே கலாநிதி நீலன் திருச்செல்வத்தோடு இணைந்து ஒரு முக்கியமான ஆவணத்தை தயாரித்தவர் என்பது எங்கள் அனைவருக்கும் தெரியும். Thereafter, in negotiations with the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam, in the Oslo Declaration, he led the Sri Lankan delegation, and there was an agreement that based on the concept of internal self-determination, the parties will explore a settlement based on federal model. ஒரு சமஷ்டி அடிப்படையிலான தீர்வை நோக்கி, அதாவது உலக சூழ்நிலையின் அடிப்படையிலே தரப்பினர் ஆராய்வார்கள் என்பது ஆஸ்லோவிலே ஏற்படுத்தப்பட்ட ஒரு இணக்கப்பாடு. அதிலேயும் பேராசிரியர் GLPD அவர்கள் தான் இலங்கை அரசாங்கத்தினுடைய தூதுக்குழு தலைவராக இருந்தவர். So in today's context, there is no better person to speak on this subject, and we warmly welcome you, sir, to address this gathering this morning, and I'm sure your articulation will not just be in this hall, but it will be carried far and wide and be a voice that will resonate for a long time to come. இன்றைக்கு நீங்கள் செய்ய போகிற இந்த பேருரை இந்த மண்டபத்துக்குள்ளே மட்டும் அடங்கி விடாமல் நீண்ட காலத்துக்கு இது தொடர்ச்சியான ஒரு குரலாக அமையும் என்பதில் எனக்கு சந்தேகமில்லை. உங்களை மனப்பூர்வமாக இந்த நிகழ்வுக்கு நாங்கள் அழைக்கிறோம்.
The celebrated Sangam poet Kaniyan Pungundran, Yadum Ore Yavarum Kenir, we are one people. I warmly thank the Emeritus Bishop Professor Srinivasan, the trustees of the Tantai Chervanagam Memorial Trust. This was in the form of the Vadupade resolution adopted by the Tamil United Liberation Front at its first national convention held on the 14th of May 1976. The historic significance of this document is that it set out for the first time in the most unambiguous terms the blueprint for an independent state for the Tamil nation, embracing the merged northern and eastern provinces. The second part of the resolution contained the nucleus of Tamil Eelam, its scope extending beyond the shores of the island. The state of Tamil Eelam was to be home not only to the people of the northern and eastern provinces, but all Tamil-speaking people living in any part of Ceylon, and to Tamils of Eelam origin living in any part of the world who may opt for citizenship of Tamil Eelam. The most discouraging element of this sequence of events was the timid and evasive approach adopted by prominent actors at crucial moments. The District Development Councils Act of 1980 presented a unique opportunity. Disappointingly, however, the Presidential Commission presided over by Mr. Victor Tenapon, Queen's Counsel, the former Chief Justice and Attorney General, lacked the courage even to interpret the terms of reference as permitting allusion to the ethnic conflict. Despite the persevering efforts of Professor A.J. Wilson, son-in-law of Mr. Chervanagam, and a confidant of President Jayachavan and Dr. Neelam Tiruchiravel, the majority of the members were inclined to adopt a narrow technical interpretation. The setting of the legislation was one in which Tamil formations, such as the Tamil United Liberation Front, were struggling to maintain their moderate postures in an increasingly polarized environment with pressure from radical elements proving almost irresistible. The whole initiative paled into insignificance in comparison with a series of tragic events, including the burning of the Jaffna library during the run-up to the District Development Council elections in the north, and the calamitous events of Black July 1983. Policymakers at a critical juncture had once again let a limited opportunity slip through their fingers. The next intervention occurred in the sunset years of the United National Party administration. This was the Parliamentary Select Committee on the Ethnic Conflict, known after its chairman as the Mangala Munasinghe Committee, appointed in August 1991. The majority report made a detailed proposal which was intended to serve as the basis of a compromise between two schools of thought. One stoutly resisting any idea of merger of the northern and eastern provinces, and the other demanding such mergers as the indispensable basis of a viable solution. An imaginative via media was the concept of the Apex Council, which formed the centerpiece of the majority report. It adopted as a point of departure two separate provincial councils to the north and the east. This dichotomy would characterize the provincial executive as well. Each provincial council would have an executive minister as the head of the board of ministers. However, over and above these, the two provincial councils together would constitute a regional council for the entire northeast region. Although presenting several features of interest as a pragmatic mediating mechanism, the proposal did not enjoy a sufficiently broad support base for implementation. Federalism, integral as it was to the value system which anchored the political life of Mr. Island, defies easy definition. Indeed, as the facilitators of the Sri Lanka peace process, when it was pursued at the international level, the Royal Norwegian government considered it central to their function to inculcate in the LTTE an understanding of the nuances of federal systems of government in practice in order to overcome inherent inhibitions. To this end, they arranged extensive travels for the Political Affairs Committee of the LTTE in Nordic countries. Subsequent to his defection with almost the entirety of the cadres in the Eastern Province, arguably the greatest blow sustained by the LTTE in its entire history, Karuna was to declare that it was this exposure which opened his eyes to a world outside the jungles of the one. Federalism as a concept represents a spectrum rather than a split. This is brought out clearly in three sets of constitutional proposals by the Chandrika Kumaratunga administration during the period 1995 to 1997. They oscillated from one end of the spectrum to the other in establishing the line of demarcation between the functions of the central government and the periphery in a coherent constitutional scheme. I would like at this point to pay tribute to the legacy of a valued friend and colleague, Dr. Neelan Tiruchaiva, who co-authored with me as Minister for Constitutional Affairs, Ethnic Affairs and National Integration, with the support of many others, including Dr. Jayanthi Vikramaratne, President's Council, the proposals of 1995, 1996 and 1997. Neelan, who had been a fellow undergraduate in the University of Sri Lanka, had proceeded to Harvard University, while I was the recipient of a Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford. The further coincidence was the entry of both of us together into the Parliament of Sri Lanka in August 1994. He was brutally assassinated because he stood in the way of the LTTE's claim to exclusivity of representation of the interests and aspirations of the Tamil people. The future might well have been different had he lived. The constitution proposals of 1995 embodied strong features of federalism and indeed went well beyond. Regional councils forming the gist of the proposals were vested with executive, legislative, and judicial competence in the subjects assigned to them. In all key areas, these powers were to be protected against encroachment by the centre. With regard to finance, regional councils were to have powers of taxation, including international borrowings and the power to promote foreign investment, international grants, and development assistance. In the crucial area of law and order and policing, provision was to be made for a regional police force headed by a regional police commissioner appointed by the chief minister. Land was clearly identified as a devolved subject, and state land within a region was to be vested in the regional council with limited reservations in respect of requirements by the central government. This document represents the strongest movement towards federal structure in the entire evolutionary process in Sri Lanka. The proposals of 1995 were modified by a more detailed draft in 1996, which represented a aggressive development. The basic weakness consisted of conferment of awesome powers on the presidency, fundamentally altering the balance of power between the centre and the regions, and making the latter vulnerable to capricious exercise of discretion, which would strike at the very root of regional authority. The mere instinct of the president was to prevail in a situation where the entire sweep of the region's powers, entrenched by constitutional provisions, was sought to be negated by executive action at the centre, nor it was being available to the region for access to the courts. This was hardly likely to inspire confidence. A corrective trend then set in, resulting in a further set of proposals published in 1997. The solution chosen this time was conferment on the regions of a power to veto proposed constitutional amendments to the content of the chapter on devolution of power to the regions and the two schedules to the draft constitution which dealt with the scope of the region's powers and the division of powers between the centre and the regions. The drastic curtailment of parliamentary powers, this was movement from one extreme to the other. Invitation to arbitrary action was shifted from centre to periphery. It is scarcely surprising that these proposals were seen to contain within them the seeds of their own destruction. The most elaborate and thorough response to the widely acknowledged imperative of constitutional reform was contained in the Constitution Bill, which, as Minister for Constitutional Affairs, I presented on behalf of President Kumarasamy to Parliament on the 3rd of August in the year 2000. While the nomenclature of federalism was not specifically invoked, its essence was captured in the provision that the Republic of Sri Lanka shall consist of the institutions of the centre and the regions. The legislative power of the people was to be exercised by Parliament and by regional councils, while the executive power of the people was to be exercised not only by the President but also by governors, acting on the advice of the respective chief ministers and regional boards of ministers. Governors of regions were to be appointed by the President in consultation with the Prime Minister and with the concurrence of the Chief Minister of the region. Exclusivity of legislative power in respect of devolved subjects was explicitly conferred on the regions. No element of equivocation characterized treatment of the controversial subjects of land and police powers. With regard to the former, the applicable provision was that every region shall succeed to all state land within the region and be at the disposal of the regional administration of that region for the purposes set out in the regional list. As for the latter, there was to be a regional police service for each region, headed by a regional police commissioner who shall be appointed by the regional police commission with the concurrence of the board of ministers of the region. Equally striking on the subject of finance was the amplitude of authority conferred through the consolidated fund of the region. Robust hostility of the LTTE to implementation of these proposals as the core of a constitutional settlement had its gruesome manifestation in the brutal killing of Dr. The chilling effect on the nature of Tamil formation in Parliament, the Tamil National Alliance, for which Dr. had been an active member, was overbearing. Compounding the problems was the attitude of the main opposition party, the United National Party, which was disinclined to cooperate after their narrow defeat in the presidential election of December 1999. It was the nation's misfortune that the culture of adversarial politics trumped the national initiative, compelling the government to withdraw the bill during the debate in Parliament. It was against the backdrop of failure of the constitutional process that direct negotiations were embarked upon between the government of Sri Lanka and the Liberation Tigers of Tamil with Norwegian facilitation in September 2002. The insuperable obstacle, it soon became evident, was the ethos of the LTTE. Dominant in their mindset was the unshakable conviction of military invincibility. In light of this, Prabhakaran saw no necessity to make any significant concession and believed fervently that the state of Tamil Eelam was well within reach. Anton Balasingham, who represented Prabhakaran in 6 rounds of direct discussions across the world, was the only member of the LTTE delegation with a grasp of the underlying issues. As my relationship with him grew less formal, I decided to put to him a candid question outside the conference room. I told him that I saw events moving relentlessly, much in the manner of a Greek tragedy, from the LTT's point of view, towards the climax. There was nevertheless a narrow window of opportunity. And I asked him why they were intractably resolved to make more use of it. Anton Balasingham's response remains indelibly etched in my mind. He told me that he had nothing to reproach himself with. He had done his best to present the reality of the situation to his leader. But the latter, intransigent in his convictions, resisted reason to the point where Balasingham was convinced that future attempts at persuasion involved peril to his own life. Eric Solheim, who had a conversation with Balasingham a few days before his death in London, told me that Balasingham died dispirited and disillusioned. The theory that the LTTE, at a decisive phase of the peace negotiations, deliberately jettisoned the option of external self-determination is total delusion. This was a myth around what came to be known as the Oslo Declaration during the 3rd session of talks in the Norwegian territory. At the end of this session, the official communique by the facilitators declared the parties agreed to explore a solution founded on the principles of internal self-determination in areas of historical habitation of the Tamil-speaking peoples based on a federal structure within a united Sri Lanka. The LTT's understanding of internal self-determination, however, was set out with clarity in the following statement. we are prepared to consider favorably a political framework that offers substantial regional autonomy and self-government in our homeland on the basis of our right to internal self-determination. But the sword of Damocles was ever present. The caveat was added with unrelenting emphasis that if this internal element of self-determination is blocked and denied, and the demand for regional self-rule is rejected, we have no alternative other than to secede and form an independent state. The LTTE then left wide open the option of external self-determination. They purported to derive authority for their position from the United Nations Declaration in 1970 on principles of international law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states, and from the judgment of the Supreme Court of Canada in 1998 in the Quebec secession case, later known case. The LTTE's rigid stance was expressed with precision in their proposal for the establishment of an interim self-governing authority, ISGA, and the conferment of all-encompassing jurisdiction upon it. The ISGA shall have plenary power for the governance of the Northeast, including powers in relation to resettlement, rehabilitation, reconstruction, and development, including improvement and upgrading of existing services and facilities, raising revenue, including imposition of taxes, revenue, levies, and duties, law and order, and overland. It was added for good measure that these powers shall include all powers and functions in relation to regional administration exercised by the government of Sri Lanka in and for the Northeast. This was in all but name the blueprint of a separate state. This went well beyond the solution which Mr. Jaffna, in his mature judgment, deemed feasible in the political and economic context of our country. Events then seem to be moving rapidly towards an impasse incapable of resolution through dialogue. One final object, albeit in uniquely distressing circumstances, appeared to present a lifeline. This was a tsunami which struck Sri Lanka on Boxing Day, the 26th of December 2004. Since much of the destruction, especially on the east coast, was in areas controlled by the LTTE, there was the urgent need for a collaborative mechanism between the government and the LTTE to deliver relief and undertake immediate reconstruction. Consequently, a painstaking attempt was made to formulate a pragmatic framework for collaboration, its parameters strictly confined to the matter in hand and devoid of political controversy to the maximum extent possible. President Kumaratunga attached great importance to the resulting B-Thomas mechanism, which, in her judgment, held out the last chance for a successful peace negotiation. However, the Supreme Court, in an interim order, struck down vital portions of the agreement, dealing with control of resources for urgently required construction and rehabilitation work. The ensuing message was unfortunate in that serious doubt was cast on the capability of structures of the Sri Lankan state to evolve an appropriate mechanism, even in the face of as excruciating a disaster as a tsunami which claimed more than 35,000 lives. Despite this unprepossessing trajectory of events, I would make bold to suggest that a sanguine outlook is not entirely unrealistic, and that's not wishful thinking. The basis of my confidence in this regard is my experience over the span of 26 years as a teacher, Dean of the Faculty of Law, and Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo. It is my firm conviction that the youth of our country are not prey to narrow communal attitudes and prejudices. They are not prey. to narrow communal attitudes and prejudices. Relations among the different ethnic communities in the environment of the country's universities are typified by camaraderie rather than mutual acrimony or suspicion. Language certainly is a barrier. I had the occasion to discuss this when I called on the Bishop of Jaffna, Dr. Namakas, yesterday. In my own undergraduate days in Federalism and Colombo, we made friendships on the basis of shared interests and values and were able to communicate comfortably in the English language. Stratification and compartmentalization are the implacable enemy of the forging of a national consciousness, especially in sentient minds. When, as Minister of Education and Higher Education, I was invited to preside over the annual prize giving at the oldest girls' school in Sri Lanka and even South Asia, situated in Uduville, I drew attention to the need for greater interaction with peers in the South through activities such as sports, debating, drama, and cultural pursuits. Reciprocally, I spoke to the leadership of schools in the South, urging them to reach out with enhanced vigor to the North to forge bonds which could potentially last a lifetime. These are the values which inform the bedrock of the life and career of SJV Jaffna. The tempests of politics, in substance if not in style, were just as intense then as they are now. But the unwavering strength of what he held sacred, never succumbing to expediency, formed the wellsprings of the fortitude which sustained him through these tempests. He made his tryst with destiny in a fulfilling and inspiring career of dedicated service. It stands out today as a beacon of light, all the more redeeming amidst the cynicism and apathy so sadly evident around us. So, ladies and gentlemen, my Lord and Bishop, it is my privilege this morning to honor a colossus whose influence survives long after. Thank you very much. Nandri.